Jenna Morales was standing in the warehouse at 6:47 a.m., coffee in one hand and her clipboard in the other, when Brandon walked in like he owned the place, which technically he did, or would someday. She'd been at Midwest Commercial Supply for 4 years, long enough to know which drivers showed up early, which clients called with last-minute changes, which routes ran smooth, and which ones needed a backup plan. Long enough to know that when you shipped restaurant equipment across 3 states in the middle of winter, you didn't leave anything to chance. Brandon had been back from business school for 6 months. He knew none of that. "Morning," she said, not looking up from her route sheet. He didn't respond. Just walked past her toward the office in the back, holding his phone like it was more important than the 14 pallets of commercial ovens and refrigeration units that needed to be on trucks and out the door by 8. Jenna watched him go, then turned back to her checklist. She was 32 years old. She'd worked in logistics since she was 24, first as a dispatcher, then as a coordinator, then as the person everyone came to when something went wrong. She didn't have a degree. She had 4 years of showing up on time, knowing her job, and fixing problems before they became disasters. Brandon had an MBA and his father's last name. The math wasn't in her favor. She took a sip of coffee and got back to work. At 7:15, her phone rang. It was the supplier in Indiana, the one who was supposed to have delivered the custom ventilation hoods for the Carver Group order yesterday afternoon. "Jenna, we've got a problem." Her stomach sank. "What kind of problem?" "The hoods didn't pass final inspection. We've got to redo the powder coating. Earliest we can ship is tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow?" She kept her voice calm, but her mind was already racing. "We've got a truck leaving for Chicago at noon today. Carver's opening their new location on Friday. They need that equipment by Thursday." "I know. I'm sorry. It's out of my hands." She closed her eyes, took a breath. "Okay, let me figure this out. I'll call you back." She hung up and stared at the route board on the wall. The Carver Group wasn't just any client. They were opening their 3rd upscale restaurant in Chicago, and they'd spent close to $80,000 on equipment, all of it scheduled to arrive Thursday so their installers could have it ready for the soft opening Friday night. If the ventilation hoods didn't arrive on time, the health inspector wouldn't sign off. No sign-off, no opening. No opening. And Carver would be furious. And Midwest Commercial Supply would lose one of their biggest clients. Jenna pulled out her phone and started scrolling through her contacts. She had a supplier in Ohio who sometimes had overstock. Maybe they had something close. Maybe she could coordinate a different pickup, reroute one of the drivers, get the hoods from somewhere else. She was 3 calls deep when Brandon walked out of the office. "Hey, Jenna." She looked up, phone pressed to her ear, and held up one finger. He didn't wait. "I need the Carver shipment status. My dad wants an update." She ended the call. "We've got a problem with the ventilation hoods. Supplier can't ship until tomorrow." Brandon's face went tight. "What do you mean they can't ship?" "Quality issue. They're fixing it now, but it pushes delivery back a day. That's not acceptable. Carver opens Friday." "I know, I'm working on a solution." "What solution?" "I've got a contact in Ohio who might have overstock. If I can confirm availability in the next hour, I can reroute one of our drivers to pick it up and still hit the Thursday window." Brandon crossed his arms. "That's a lot of ifs." "It's the best option we have." "The best option," Brandon said slowly, "would have been making sure this didn't happen in the first place." Jenna stared at him. "I ordered the hoods 6 weeks ago. The supplier confirmed delivery Monday. This isn't a scheduling issue. It's a vendor issue." "And who manages the vendors?" "I do, but I can't control their quality inspections." Brandon stepped closer, and his voice dropped just enough that the 2 drivers loading pallets nearby couldn't hear. "You know what my dad told me when I came back to run operations?" Jenna said nothing. "He said the problem with this place is that people get comfortable. They stop thinking ahead. They stop being proactive." He looked at her like she was exactly what he was talking about. "Maybe if you'd been paying closer attention, we wouldn't be in this situation." Jenna felt something cold settle in her chest. "I've been paying attention," she said quietly. "I've been doing this job for 4 years. I know every supplier, every driver, every client. I know how to fix problems. That's what I'm doing right now." Brandon smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "Here's the thing, Jenna. You're good at putting out fires, but we need someone who prevents them. Someone strategic. Someone who thinks long-term." He paused, and the smile faded. "Someone who's not replaceable." The words hung in the air between them. Jenna didn't move, didn't blink. Brandon turned and walked back toward the office. "Fix it," he said over his shoulder, "and let me know when it's handled." The warehouse door slammed behind him. One of the drivers, Carlos, who'd been with the company for 8 years, looked over at Jenna. "You okay?" She nodded, but her hands were shaking. "Yeah," she said. "I'm fine." She wasn't fine. She went back to her desk in the corner of the warehouse. Not an office, just a metal desk with a computer and a phone and a space heater that barely worked, and sat down. Replaceable. She'd heard worse. She'd worked in logistics long enough to deal with rude clients, angry drivers, and managers who treated warehouse staff like they were invisible. But this was different, because Brandon wasn't just some random supervisor. He was the owner's son. He was being groomed to take over the company, and he'd just made it very clear that he didn't think she belonged here. She looked at the photo taped to the side of her monitor, her and her daughter Ava at the zoo last summer. Ava was 7. She had Jenna's dark hair and her ex-husband's smile and a laugh that made everything feel lighter. Jenna worked here because the pay was decent, the hours were predictable, and she could be home by 6 most nights to make dinner and help with homework. She didn't love the job, but she was good at it, and it let her be the mom she needed to be. If Brandon pushed her out, where would she go? She took a breath, picked up her phone, and got back to work. By 9:30, she'd found the hoods. Her contact in Ohio had 3 units in overstock, close enough to the specs Carver needed that they'd work as a temporary solution until the custom ones were ready. She coordinated the pickup, rerouted Carlos to swing through Ohio on his way to Chicago, and confirmed with the supplier that they'd have everything ready by noon. It would be tight, but it would work. She walked into the back office where Brandon was on his phone, scrolling through something that definitely wasn't work. "I found a solution," she said. He looked up, annoyed. "What?" "The ventilation hoods. I've got a supplier in Ohio with overstock units that'll work. Carlos is picking them up at noon and delivering everything to Carver tomorrow morning as scheduled." Brandon set his phone down. "Overstock? That's not what we ordered." "It's close enough. The specs are nearly identical. Carver won't know the difference, and it gets them open on time." "And what about the custom hoods?" "They'll be ready next week. We can deliver them as a follow-up and swap them out." Brandon leaned back in his chair. "So we're delivering the wrong product. We're delivering a working product that meets their needs and keeps them on schedule. That's not the same thing." Jenna felt her jaw tighten. "It's the best solution we have, unless you've got a better idea." Brandon stared at her for a long moment. Then he stood up, grabbed his jacket, and walked toward the door. "Fine, do it. But if Carver complains, that's on you." He left. Jenna stood in the empty office, her hands clenched at her sides. Then she walked back out to the warehouse and got back to work. Carlos left at 12:15 with a full truck, ovens, refrigerators, prep tables, shelving units, and the 3 overstock ventilation hoods Jenna had spent all morning tracking down. She watched the truck pull out of the lot, then went back to her desk and sent an email to the Carver Group's project manager, letting them know the shipment was on its way and would arrive Thursday morning as promised. She didn't CC Brandon. At 2:00 her phone rang. It was Jim Hartman, the owner, Brandon's father, the man who'd hired her 4 years ago when she'd walked in with a resume that was mostly warehouse and dispatcher work and no college degree. "Jenna, can you come to my office for a minute?" Her stomach dropped. "Sure, I'll be right there." She hung up, stood, and walked through the warehouse to the small office in the back where Jim spent most of his time managing accounts and staying out of the day-to-day. When she walked in, Brandon was already there. Jim gestured to the chair next to his son. "Have a seat." She sat. Jim folded his hands on his desk and looked at her with the kind of expression she couldn't read. "Brandon tells me we had an issue with the Carver shipment this morning." Jenna nodded. "The supplier had a quality issue with the custom ventilation hoods. I coordinated a replacement from another supplier and rerouted the delivery. Everything's on schedule." Jim looked at Brandon. "Is that accurate?" Brandon hesitated. "Mostly. But the replacement units aren't what Carver ordered." "They're close enough," Jenna said, "and they'll keep Carver on track for their opening." Jim looked at her. "Did you clear this with anyone before making the call?" "No, I didn't have time. The truck was leaving at noon, and I needed to make a decision." "That's the problem," Brandon said. "She made a decision without consulting anyone. What if Carver's not happy with the replacement units? What if they file a complaint?" Jim was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Jenna. "Walk me through what happened, start to finish." So she did. She explained the supplier call, the quality issue, the tight timeline, her contacts in Ohio, the rerouted pickup, the delivery confirmation. She kept it factual, clear, calm. When she finished, Jim nodded slowly. "And you're confident this will work?" "Yes." He looked at Brandon. "You have a problem with how she handled it?" Brandon shifted in his seat. "I think we need to be more careful about making judgment calls without approval." "She's the logistics coordinator," Jim said. "Making judgment calls is her job." Brandon opened his mouth, then closed it. Jim looked at Jenna. "Okay, let me know when the shipment arrives and Carver confirms receipt." "I will. That's all." She stood, nodded at both of them, and walked out. Brandon stayed behind. Jenna didn't sleep much that night. She kept checking her phone, waiting for an update from Carlos. He'd texted her around 7 to say he'd made the pickup in Ohio and was back on the road. The hoods were loaded. Everything looked good. But she wouldn't feel better until the truck arrived in Chicago and Carver confirmed receipt. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the furnace kick on in the hallway, thinking about the way Brandon had looked at her in that office. Replaceable. She'd worked hard her entire adult life. She'd put herself through a logistics certification program at the community college while working full-time as a dispatcher. She'd learned the industry from the ground up: dispatch, freight coordination, vendor management, route planning. She knew how to read a bill of lading, how to negotiate with carriers, how to talk a frustrated client down from the ledge when a shipment ran late. She wasn't just good at her job, she was essential. But Brandon didn't see that. He saw someone without a degree, someone who worked in a warehouse, someone who could be replaced by the next person willing to work for $48,000 a year and no real benefits beyond basic health insurance. She turned over and looked at her phone again. Nothing. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep. Thursday morning, she was at her desk by 6:30. Carlos was scheduled to arrive at the Carver site in Chicago by 9 a.m. The installation crew would be there to unload. If everything went smoothly, Carver's project manager would confirm receipt by mid-morning, and Jenna could finally breathe. She checked her email. Nothing yet. She checked the truck's GPS tracking. Carlos was 20 minutes outside Chicago, right on schedule. She made coffee in the break room and brought it back to her desk, her hands wrapped around the warm mug, waiting. At 7:45, Brandon walked into the warehouse. He didn't look at her, just walked straight to his office and closed the door. Jenna turned back to her computer. At 9:10, her phone buzzed. A text from Carlos. Delivered. All good. She exhaled slowly, set the phone down, and opened her email to send a follow-up to Carver's project manager. Before she could start typing, her phone rang. It was Jim. "Jenna, I just got off the phone with Dave Carver." Her heart stopped. "Okay," she said carefully. "He wanted to thank us personally for getting the shipment there on time. Said his installers are already on site and everything looks great." She closed her eyes. "That's good to hear." "He also said something interesting." She waited. "He said he spoke to the driver this morning, Carlos, and Carlos told him you coordinated the whole thing, that you found replacement units overnight and rerouted the delivery to make sure they didn't miss their opening." Jenna didn't say anything. "Is that true?" "Yes." Jim was quiet for a moment. "Why didn't you tell me that yesterday?" "You asked me to walk you through what happened." "I did. But you didn't mention that you stayed late, worked your contacts, and pulled this off on your own." "It's my job," Jenna said simply. Jim made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Yeah, it is." He paused. "Anyway, Carver's happy. Wanted to make sure I knew who to thank, so thank you." "You're welcome. I'll talk to you later." He hung up. Jenna set her phone down and stared at her desk for a long moment. Then she got back to work. At 10:30, Brandon came out of his office and walked over to her desk. "I heard Carver called." "Yeah, everything went fine." "Good." He didn't sound happy about it. "My dad wants to see us both in his office at 11. Jenna looked up. "Why?" "I don't know. He just said to be there." He walked away before she could respond. At 11, Jenna walked into Jim's office for the second time in 2 days. Brandon was already sitting in the chair across from Jim's desk, his arms crossed, his jaw tight. Jim gestured for Jenna to sit. She did. "I wanted to talk to both of you about what happened this week," Jim said. He looked at Brandon first. "You told me yesterday that Jenna made a decision without consulting anyone, and that we needed better oversight on judgment calls." Brandon nodded. "Right. But Dave Carver just spent 10 minutes on the phone telling me that Jenna is the reason his opening is still on schedule, that she went above and beyond to fix a problem that wasn't her fault." Brandon shifted in his seat. "I'm not saying she didn't fix it. I'm saying she should have run it by me first. Why? Jim asked. Brandon blinked. What? Why should she have run it by you? You're in operations. She's in logistics. This was a logistics problem. She solved it. But I'm her supervisor. On paper, maybe, Jim said. But you've been here 6 months. Jenna's been here 4 years. She knows this business better than you do. Brandon's face flushed. Dad, I'm not finished. Jim's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now. I brought you back here because I thought you were ready to learn the business, to work your way up, to earn people's respect. But instead, you've been treating the people who actually run this place like they're beneath you. That's not true, isn't it? Jim leaned forward. You called Jenna replaceable, in front of the warehouse crew. Is that true? Silence. Brandon looked at Jenna, then back at his father. I was making a point about accountability. No, Jim said. You were being disrespectful, and you were wrong. He picked up a piece of paper from his desk and slid it across to Brandon. It was an email from Dave Carver. Jim pointed to a line near the bottom. Read that part out loud. Brandon hesitated, then picked up the paper. Please pass along my thanks to Jenna Morales. She's the reason this project stayed on track. We've worked with a lot of suppliers over the years, and she's one of the best coordinators we've ever dealt with. You're lucky to have her. Brandon set the paper down. Jim looked at him. Does that sound replaceable to you? Brandon said nothing. Jim turned to Jenna. I owe you an apology. I should have stepped in sooner. I knew Brandon was struggling to adjust, but I didn't realize he was taking it out on you. It's okay, Jenna said quietly. It's not okay, Jim said. You're a valuable part of this company. You've earned your place here, and I should have made that clear from the beginning. He looked back at Brandon. You've got a lot to learn, and the first thing you need to learn is that the people who keep this place running, the coordinators, the drivers, the warehouse crew, they're not replaceable. They're the backbone of this business. Without them, we don't have a business. Brandon's jaw was clenched so tight, Jenna thought it might crack. Understood? Jim asked. Understood, Brandon said through his teeth. Good. You're dismissed. Brandon stood, walked out of the office and slammed the door behind him. Jim sighed and rubbed his face with both hands. I'm sorry you had to deal with that, he said. It's fine, Jenna said again. It's not, but I'm going to make sure it doesn't happen again. She nodded. Go back to work, Jim said. And thank you. Really. Jenna stood and walked out. For the rest of the day, Brandon avoided her. He stayed in his office with the door closed. He didn't come out for lunch. He didn't check in with the drivers or walk the floor the way he sometimes did when he wanted to look busy. Jenna worked through her usual tasks, updating route schedules, coordinating next week's shipments, answering emails from clients. Everything felt normal. Everything felt fine. But she knew it wasn't over, because Brandon wasn't the kind of person who accepted being called out in front of someone he considered beneath him. And she was still just a logistics coordinator with no degree and a metal desk in the corner of a warehouse. He was still the boss's son. On Friday afternoon, Jenna was finishing up paperwork when her phone buzzed. A text from Carlos. Hey, boss wants to see you before you leave. Said it's good news. She frowned, set her phone down, and walked to Jim's office. The door was open. Jim waved her in. Sit down for a second. She sat. Jim leaned back in his chair and looked at her with something that might have been pride. I've been thinking about this week, he said. About how you handled the Carver situation. About how you've been handling everything for the past 4 years. Jenna waited. I think it's time we made some changes around here. Her stomach tightened. What kind of changes? The good kind, Jim said. I'm creating a new position. Operations manager, someone who oversees logistics, coordinates with drivers and vendors, handles client relations, and makes sure everything runs smoothly. He paused. I want you to take it. Jenna stared at him. What about Brandon? Brandon's going to focus on business development and client acquisition, things he's actually good at. But the day-to-day operations? That's yours, if you want it. She didn't know what to say. It comes with a raise, Jim added. 15%. And your own office, and a title that actually reflects what you've been doing here for years. Jenna's throat felt tight. You don't have to answer right now, Jim said. Think about it over the weekend. Let me know Monday. She nodded. Okay. But for what it's worth, Jim said, I hope you say yes, because you're not replaceable, Jenna. You never were. That night, Jenna sat at her kitchen table with a glass of wine and her laptop open in front of her. Ava was asleep upstairs. The house was quiet. She pulled up the email from Dave Carver that Jim had printed out and read it again. You're lucky to have her. She thought about the way Brandon had looked at her when he called her replaceable. The way he'd blamed her for a problem that wasn't her fault. The way he'd tried to take credit for a solution he had nothing to do with. And she thought about the way Jim had looked at her this afternoon when he offered her the promotion. Like she mattered. Like she'd earned it. She closed the laptop and took a sip of wine. For the first time all week, she smiled.